Risk-free return is the theoretical return attributed to an investment that provides a guaranteed return with zero risks. The risk-free rate of return represents the interest on an investor's money that would be expected from an absolutely risk-free investment over a specified period of time. Risk-free return is a theoretical number representing the expected return on an investment that carries no risks. A risk-free return doesn't really exist and is therefore theoretical, as all investments carry some risk. US Treasuries are seen as a good example of a risk-free investment since the government cannot default on its debt. As such, the interest rate on a 3-month US Treasury bill is often used as a stand-in for the short-term risk-free rate, since it has almost no risk of default. Even with the incredibly low CPI that's currently being recorded, the risk-free return is still negative, which forces market participants to increase the risk they assume in order to maintain their store of past productivity. The consequence of this will either lead to people showing very low time preference or malinvesting in riskier assets they may not fully understand to try to maintain their standard of living once they are no longer capable of working.
So now you have Dogecoin, a fake asset in an asset class that nobody knows whether or not it'll be legal, being pumped by a guy whose company can't consistently turn a profit from selling automobiles, which is their core business, whose market cap was like $50 billion last year, but meanwhile, this guy has added $100 billion to his net worth last year alone, at the same time that the country has 10 million people out of work and is in an enormous economic depression. That guy, who, by the way, if that was you, you're the luckiest motherfucker on earth. Take the money and run. Take the money and run. I'm stepping down as CEO. I've sold some stock. I'm stepping down as CEO. I'm going to be executive chairman. I'm going to bring in Mark Fields or Mary Barra as CEO, and I'm going to a beach on Cabo, and I'm going to mind my own business and make sure I don't piss off the SEC anymore. That guy who should be doing that guy is instead on Twitter pumping this worthless asset. Folks, that is what happens when you have a market that is in a bubble, okay? You have Dogecoin with a $6 billion market cap being pumped by a fucking billionaire, okay, who told the SEC, literally told the SEC to suck his dick. That's what he said. I mean, it's just, I don't really get it. But if you can't see that we're in a period of excess from that, folks, I'm not sure what's going to do it for you. Maybe GameStop will do it for you. Maybe $1 trillion worth of hot money that goes to retail investors who have no clue about the stock market or how it works, dumping money into a speculative asset and driving the price of a failing retailer from, 3 to 400 in the course of 2 months. Maybe that'll do it for you. So when you rig interest rates and you keep interest rates at zero, other macroeconomic indicators have to adjust accordingly. It's a system. They all work together. You can't change one part of the economy in a very drastic way and expect the rest of the economy not to react. And so that's what we're seeing, right? And the Fed thinks it's great. They're like, hey, we fucking turn the dial on interest rates and we print all this money and the market goes up. We get it, cause and effect. It's like, yeah, great, but are you seeing all of the other problems? Riots. It's people feeling the weighted blanket of all these pressures. It's going to the car ashtray and not having enough change in the ashtray anymore to get the cup of coffee in the morning, which is an example that I've lived. It's having to choose between bills, right? What happens when you can't afford Netflix one month, even if it's not a necessity to live, but you got to ditch the Netflix bill because you need the $19.99 a month to add to your electric bill. Well, what does that mean? That's your quality of life getting worse. What makes the consequences of Fed policy so nefarious is you don't see them right away. It's prices going up over the course of a year. They kind of tick up. Nobody comes to your house and waves a fucking sign that says, your gas bill's going up 10% this month. Aren't you fucking stoked about it? Nobody does that. If you're selling potato chips, they don't put on the front of the bag, last year $3.99, now $4.99. Enjoy it, dickhead. No, they make the bag 2 ounces smaller and they keep the price somewhat the same and they put some other label on it that says, new look, same great taste. Which, as George Carlin would say, basically means just bend over, right? Similarly, you don't see the wealth gap widening. It's just something that happens. Jeff Bezos wakes up and checks his brokerage statement, and he's got $10 billion today that he didn't have last week. Okay, like, what does that mean for you? Nothing. That means you had $500 in your checking account last week, and this week you still have $500 in your checking account, and maybe a half of a cent in interest, right? So it doesn't mean anything to you. So you're bearing the brunt of all these rising costs, and meanwhile, the people at the top end of the spectrum, as a result of Fed policy, they're outpacing inflation because of how much wealth they are accumulating due to these policies, right? It's like if you and Jeff Bezos are two dogs running around a fucking dog track, like those Greyhound tracks where they shoot the rabbit up the side of the rail and the Greyhound's got to chase it around the tracks. And the rabbit that runs around the track that they're chasing, that's inflation. It's this moving target that you kind of always have to run to be catching up to. It's constantly devaluing your money by between 2 and 10% every year. It's your cost of living rising. It's all of those things. And that rabbit takes off. What are you doing? Well, you're losing ground to the rabbit. The rabbit is going. Every time you run one lap at the track, the rabbit's running like 2 laps. So it doesn't matter. It's a losing proposition. The more you run, the further away the rabbit gets. And that fucking sucks. That is a shitty feeling. And that's why a lot of people feel like shit. And a lot of people are protesting. And a lot of people are fucking losing their minds. I mean, they say it's for all these other causes, but I think it's because they can't catch the rabbit. And what's Jeff Bezos doing? Well, when you wake up in the morning and clean the shit out of your eyes and check your brokerage statement and see that you made $50 million overnight because somebody is ramping the S&P futures at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that those are now a tail wagging the dog type indicator, which leads stocks higher during the day. Well, what are you doing? You're running 554,000 laps around the track before the rabbit even finishes one lap. So that's what the people at the top are doing, while you're just not making up ground. At some point, the rabbit gets so far ahead, you just say, I quit, and you start running backwards. You ever be like down in a video game when you do one of those racing video games, and you just get lapped like 6 times by the race leader because you're doing so fucking bad? And then by like lap 6 out of 10, I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to start driving backwards and just see if I can ram into people and fuck up other people's races. That's what happens in the public discourse when people get so far behind the rabbit. They just say, fuck it. We're not playing in this system anymore. I'm not in the race. I don't care if I lose. I have nothing to lose. And that's when you start seeing people lash out and you see real weird shit happening.
You can calculate an index called the Gini Coefficient. And the Gini Coefficient is a number that represents how much inequality of income distribution there is in a given geographical area. So you could calculate a Gini coefficient for a street or an area in a city or a state or a country. You can do it at all those levels. And you always hear this idea that poverty causes crime. That's a classic left-wing idea, but it's wrong. It's seriously wrong, and it's importantly wrong, and it's definitively wrong. Not only that, so there's no argument about this. It's already been established. What causes crime, especially aggressive crime, is relative poverty. And relative poverty is not the same thing as poverty at all. Poverty is when you don't have enough to eat. Relative poverty is when the guy next door has a much better car than you. Now, what's really interesting about the Gini coefficient is that if you go to places where everyone, roughly speaking, is poor, say by national standards, there's almost no crime. And if you go to places where everyone's rich, then there's almost no crime. But if you go places where there are poor people and moderately well-off people and rich people, and the distribution is really steep, then the rate of aggressive behavior among young men, and it's usually within their own ethnic group, starts to skyrocket out of control. And the reason for that seems to be that if the dominance hierarchy is too steep, then the young men have no likelihood of climbing to a dominant position while playing the standard social game. And so what they do is turn to aggression to make their mark on the world. And it works too. If you're looking for status in a place where status is hard to achieve, and you're the meanest, toughest guy around, a bunch of people who, like you, don't have much money, then you're going to benefit from that status.
I'm not entirely certain, really, that Warren Mosler actually understands this, because he doesn't seem to get why people would want to preserve their purchasing power across time.
There's always been this idea that the money, whatever that is supposed to be a store of value, which means an investment vehicle.
And subsequently, he was scorched by Adam on this one afterwards.
But if you're only investing to beat inflation, then you're about the most piss poor investor in the world. I want 100% on my money. I want 1,000% on my money.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're not just investing. You're investing because you want to pick things. You want to buy things now that you think will be worth more in the future. Buy low, sell high, the central aspect of investing. But the whole debate over currency, over the money supply, over going back to the gold standard is this fight over inflation.
Right. Okay. As opposed to a policy tool to promote output, win the war, whatever. Okay. And so we've got lots of investment vehicles. The currency doesn't necessarily need to be an investment vehicle. That's a political choice.
You heard it. Money doesn't have to be a store of value or an investment vehicle. That's a political choice. But deciding to do the opposite, that's not a political choice? Come on.